I dated this guy for 2 months and it ended terribly. He made a silly mistake and I impulsively broke up with him. Anyway, I wanted him back, but he made it clear to me that he moved on already. His best friend even told me he didn't want me anymore. We went no contact, starting from November 2023. I was super sad, but I knew about the law of assumption. I realized I made him screw up with my insecurities. I decided to ignore the 3D and started imagining him texting me and begging for forgiveness. At one point I didn't even care if he came back anymore. It's crazy because in January I was convinced he didn't want anything to do with me. Anyway, I moved on, kept being delusional and I detached, while visualizing. A few days ago, May 2024, he reached out and was begging on his knees for a second chance. He told me he couldn't let go of me and that I was the girl of his dreams. This is what manifestation is. I am powerful, we all are. If I can do it, then so can you. Don't give up, go live your dream life. I did used to stalk him every day at the beginning of me manifesting him. It's only when I genuinely started thinking stuff like, why wouldn't he want me? He wanted me once, so what's different? I'm so hot, etc. That's when I stopped checking his socials and focused on myself. He ran to me on his knees not long after, and I need to emphasize, I didn't care anymore, because I felt good enough about myself anyways. I would therefore say that self-concept is really what helped me in my journey. May 2023, at 31 I moved back in with my parents, because I lost my job and got dumped. I was living in CA, but could not afford my rent with no job. So back to East Coast I went. I was having a lot of trouble finding a full-time job that paid my previous salary of $110, so I took a part-time job while I lived with them and continued looking. This was May 2023. It took a little longer than expected to get back on my feet and eventually, I started to feel really stressed, like it would never happen. In November, I visited CA to see friends and stayed in an Airbnb in a neighborhood I'd never been to. I loved the apartment and the building, so even with no job I asked the landlord how much rent was. The price was reasonable and within the budget of the salaries of jobs I'd been interviewing for. The apartment number of the Airbnb was 507. There's a picture of me from November on the balcony of that apartment captioned "Back by popular demand." I went back to the East Coast and decided that's where I was going to live. It wasn't a dream apartment, I mentioned that because I had no pedestal attached to it. It's very nice though. I had a few job interviews in November, December, and I was desperate to get back, checking my phone and email every day for interview updates. January rolled around and nothing. Around early January, my CA best friend's boyfriend asked me to come surprise her for her birthday end of month. Flights were really expensive, and I had a training booked that weekend that I didn't think I could reschedule. I knew I couldn't swing it. He asked me again and I decided I'd at least try and figure it out. I visualized walking down the hallway of her apartment to surprise her. I actually got very emotional during this visual. In this visual was also my SP walking with me. I looked at flights again and realized I could fly out of other airport using points for $60 instead of $1,000. I never even check prices for there, because they're usually more expensive than my usual airport. Then I asked to reschedule my training and I could with no cost to me, even though the fine print said no. Then my SP, who I hadn't reached out to at all and don't talk to regularly, texted me and offered to pick me up from the airport. There's a video of me walking to her front door and it looks exactly like the visual I had in my mind's eye including SP. It may seem like this was an easy situation to get to, but I promise it wasn't. I did not think it was possible due to my schedule and budget. Also, the original plan wasn't to meet at the apartment. My visual was more accurate than the plan itself. End of January, while I was visiting her, my heart ached for CA. Like I really felt the worst I had since I left. I started furiously applying to jobs and decided I'd be back March 1st, no matter what. Why? Because circumstances don't matter. This was end of January. On my way home, booked another flight for February 16th because I didn't want to be gone again for that long, and I decided I'd use that time to move before I drove back. Keep in mind, I had no job, no apartment. I just decided February 16th was moving day. That way my apartment would be ready when I drove my dogs back with me for my March 1st move-in. Again, this was just me being delusional. End of January, I heard back from one of the jobs almost immediately and went through the interview process. The interview I had with the hiring manager went terribly. Like it was the worst one I'd ever had. So I let it go, knowing I wouldn't get the job. But still I assumed something would come through. In the meantime, I applied to an apartment at the building from before. Available March 9th, Unit 411. I wrote a fake offer letter and got approved. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I assumed it would be okay. 2 weeks pass and I find out I didn't get the job, but a new job on her team had just opened up, and I wouldn't even have to interview again. Just confirm with the client and accept the offer. It was for 115. This was February 14th, but I was supposed to start March 4th. Oh no. Well, I still had my trip booked back to CA from the month prior. And actually, an apartment had just come available for February 16, Unit 506. The one right next to the Airbnb, so I moved my stuff back in that weekend. The dogs and I drove back and arrived March 2nd. My apartment has the same view from my visual, the other apartment did not. I stumbled across law of attraction and assumption when I was really young, 14. Since then I genuinely have manifested such a lucky life. I thought I'd inspire people to believe in the law, as so many others do. I'm 19 and everyone in my life only talks about how lucky of a person I am. It truly follows me around. Everyone I tell my life story to says, "Wow, you have such good luck." Sorry if this is long-winded, but I'm happy if it helps anyone at all. This isn't me scripting manifestations, I've genuinely lived all of this luckiness, and you can too. 1. A transfer to an expensive private school. This was the first ever manifestation I ever got at 14, and it was accidental and before I really knew the concept of Neville's teachings. I grew up on a very tiny island, known for being the most expensive in the world. And it definitely lives up to its name. Billionaires, millionaires, and celebrities buy their vacation houses and yacht here to get away from the press, while the locals generally struggle to keep up. My parents are immigrants, and while they are not poor, they were extremely middle class and feeding our family of 5. My sisters are significantly older than I, so they also had to pay international fees for their university and living abroad as there is no university in my country. They were spending over $100K a year to sustain my 2 sisters lives out there, and it left us with very little money at home when taking into consideration the cost of living. To add to the stress, at the time my mother lost her job, and the company my father was vice president at went bankrupt. At this time my father took out loans to literally feed my family, and they were in no financial state to be sending me to private school that cost $24,000 a year. We moved to a really tiny apartment, and when my sisters would come home all 3 of us would share a room. At public school I struggled deeply with mental health, like really bad. I cried every day, got bullied, and I kid you not spent every lunchtime on the steps alone. I had just found out about law of assumption, but very vaguely. I had wanted to attend private school, because my only friend on the island did, and it honestly felt like my only chance at survival. I was desperate. I knew we couldn't afford it, and when I asked my mom about it, she literally just laughed in my face, and when I did again she got extremely angry. But I persisted. Looking back, I literally just lived in the end without knowing what that was. Even though in my 3D, I knew it was impossible, I just had this firm knowing within that it was going to happen. I looked into scholarships, and they only gave one away. I applied to that and would just tell myself it was going to happen. Eventually, because I had persisted, my mother allowed me to apply on the condition I figured out the paperwork on my own. I told everyone around me that I was transferring before I knew if I could even go or not, or if I was even accepted. Funnily enough, after just being in the state already, I really felt I already had it. I got the email that I got the scholarship and the remaining fees my parents could afford to pay. Because suddenly my mom got an even better job, and my father ended up leaving the company and starting 2 businesses. Also, When I transferred, I met and befriended tons of people and grew into my best self. This led me on the path I am now. I actually have friends for life, and I got into a beautiful relationship when I was there as well. It was the best thing I did for myself. 2. A whole gap year in Southeast Asia. I really struggled in my senior year, and when I got rejected to my top university choice, I was really crushed and felt I needed a break. I also was going through a bad breakup. Long story short, my extremely conservative parents were not okay, like at all about this, and threatened many times that they would disown me. They said they definitely would not be funding it even though at this point had the money, and I would be on my own. I was desperate to travel, but didn't know how. I did the same thing. All throughout exams and at graduation everyone would ask me, "What's next?" And said, "I'm going on a gap year." With full confidence. I had no money and my parents were not going to fund it at all. Even though I wasn't allowed to get a job legally as an expat, I got one working in a tourist shop under the table, but it still wouldn't have been enough. But one of my best friend's moms, a friend I made at said private school, is a multi-millionaire and has owned over 10 businesses. They moved to Thailand shortly after I met them. Randomly last summer, she emailed me with her new business venture and was paying a number of girls to put together a marketing pitch. I kid you not, this was literally just a PowerPoint. A PowerPoint. I got paid $1,400. For a PowerPoint. She was always such a bigger supporter of mine and then invited me to stay at her home in Thailand for however long. I didn't have to pay any accommodation or food. I stayed for 4 months and traveled with my best friends. Met lifelong ones. They had guests over every 2 weeks it seemed, and I met my first 2 billionaires having dinner with their friends. During this time I also had dinner with Thai celebrities, by coincidence, and my network grew incredibly. 2 of my own friends flew out to stay with me, and they let them stay. They stayed in a 9-bedroom house with full staff. Craziest experience ever. The best part is that they are the most genuine, kind and caring people ever, and are truly my second family now. I am extremely grateful to have met them and to have visited. I love them to bits with all my heart, I can't even express it. Also, my parents obviously didn't disown me and found it quite inspiring that I managed to fund the tickets. 3. Remember that university I got rejected from last year? I got in. For years, I had wanted to attend this art school in the UK. It's ranked number 1 in the world for fashion and its alumni include the wonderful John Galliano, Alexander McQueen, Stella McCartney, and recently Miss Sohee. If you love fashion you probably know what school this is. The acceptance rate is tough, especially for fashion. The Harvard of art school students. I was just a literal small-town girl, 21 square miles to be exact, and everyone around me was going into finance and law, and I never had any confidence in my fashion abilities as much as I wholeheartedly loved it. This university was on my vision board for 3 years. When I got rejected last year, I was so angry and felt quite frustrated. Deep down, I just had no self-confidence, and I truly felt I was going to get rejected. And surprise! I did. On my gap, being surrounded with literal billionaires and millionaires in the fucking flesh, working for one as well, many of whom also had small beginnings, there was one underlying trait each swore by. Which was in their own ways, the law of assumption. For example, many believed that you are what you believe you are and that it was very important to dominantly believe you could succeed. It totally changed my thought process. I then read Neville's work, and also other books such as The Game of Life and How to Play It and The Power of Positive Thinking, my favorite. Wow, life-changing for real. Once I kept making the teachings a habit, it all came naturally to me. I had the confidence to make my own dress, and reapply. I applied to my dream uni 7 hours before the deadline and just detached. I visualized doing sats of my acceptance email and different techniques, and sure enough, I got the offer email and it was the happiest moment ever. They even changed their conditions to let me in. What made it even more once in a lifetime is that on my gap year I met who I believe is my absolute platonic soulmate and lifelong friend, and she got into the exact course and university And I had no idea who she was until I met her through a friend. Despite the acceptance rate, she is also a firm believer of the law, and we manifested this together. The difference from the first time around and this time was my state, and just knowing internally I was just so sure as if it was fact, which came after consistent practice of the law. I have a few favorite techniques that really helped me. 4. Completely brand new free vehicle and dream job. I think this is my favorite story mainly because it was the first time where I felt I truly understood Neville's teachings consciously, and there was a click. I had the most resistance, but I was able to rewire my subconscious. For context, most people get around my island by motorbikes, and a good one ranges around $4,000 after insurance and licensing, which is a legal requirement. When I got home from my gap year, I had only $200, which went quickly because of how expensive my country is. So no money or job, my old bike broke down and I was stuck with the shitty bus. Public transport here is expensive if you have somewhere to go all the time, and really inconvenient because of how many bloody tourists fill the bus. It would make me so late, and I live 30 minutes away from the main city, so I was getting really depressed holing myself inside. I needed a bike to get a job without exhausting myself. My sister moved back from Canada, and I told her my plan. I said I'm gonna get a bike. And she kinda gave me one of those surface laughs, did one of those skeptical "okay if you say so." I definitely had resistance. My parents again did not want to purchase me the bike, as last time I had gotten a ticket for no insurance, and they didn't feel I was responsible. Also, we have a complicated relationship. How was I gonna get a bike? But I was more confident in the law after seeing my acceptance letter, so I decided to really give this my all. At first, I just affirmed I was gonna get a new Vespa whenever I saw one out, and would tell my sister and my mom that a blue Vespa was my sign I was going to get one. I saw them everywhere and affirmed. I would get on the bus and go out as if I already had easy transportation, and would envision that the bus was my bike, getting very excited. One day, while I was feeling very content about my current state, I got on the bus and had the urge to open Facebook. I never do, but to my surprise, after a few scrolls, my local newspaper was advertising that the biggest motorbike store was giving out a free new bike every month with insurance and licensing paid for a year. All you had to do was write a paragraph. I was astonished. There actually was a free way to get a bike, and it plopped right into my lap. I had never heard of this. Naturally, I applied, and lucky me, it was the start of the month. I said to myself, I am gonna commit this month to consistency and persistence. I wrote my paragraph about how I wanted the bike to apply to a very specific high-end boutique store that I've always wanted work at. For a month, I meditated right when I woke in morning and at night using SATs, and just went to bed feeling fulfilled. I had so much fun with my visualizations, and I never missed a day, just because I wanted to. My sister does not believe in law of assumption and thought it was a bit cray. It was my first time really dedicating myself to consciously manifesting, so I also sometimes had doubts. But I would let them pass, then affirm the opposite. Eventually I felt I didn't need to anymore. I reached a state of detachment naturally. A month and a couple days passed, and honestly forgot I even applied. But there it was. An email telling me I won a free bike. The crazier part was that it was even more expensive than the Vespa, and I got to pick the model. My sister was blown away. As for the job, which I had casually included in my SATs, I just finished the interview for. They are a high-end boutique who doesn't open hiring up often. I had said for years it was my dream summer job, but they never were hiring, even when I emailed them. After actually using SATs, I saw them post a hiring advert on their IG. Perfect timing. They hadn't hired in 3 years. What a coincidence. The interview went amazing, and I feel as though I'm going to get the job. I'm saying this all to say, this is your reality. Everything you need to succeed you already have, because it is within. A state is within. My biggest tip is have fun with your manifestations, and stay grateful always. It's so much fun manifesting. Life is beautiful if you let it be, and it's easy if you let it be. 2 blessings. Keep going strong.